I walked into our bedroom and found my girlfriend's dead ex-husband hiding in our closet. The running shoe fell from the top shelf and landed at my feet while I was reaching for my winter jacket. I picked it up, confused, because Nina only wore a size 7 and this was clearly a men's 11. I stood there holding it, my hand already reaching up to push aside the hanging clothes, when I saw him. A man crouched in the back corner of our walk-in closet, behind Nina's dress collection, staring at me with eyes that looked like he'd been caught in headlights. His finger pressed against his lips in a shushing gesture. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. This wasn't a break-in. This was someone who'd been comfortable enough to remove his shoes. We'd been living together for 14 months. Nina Westfield had moved into my condo in Arlington after 6 months of dating, and I'd thought we were building something real. She was a pediatric nurse at Georgetown University Hospital, worked long shifts, came home exhausted but always made time for us. She'd been married before, she told me on our 3rd date, to her college sweetheart Trevor Vaughn. He'd died in a car accident 4 years ago on Interstate 95, and she'd spent 2 years in grief counseling before she was ready to date again. I'd held her while she cried about it exactly twice. The photos of him were in a box in her storage unit, she said, because seeing his face every day made it impossible to move forward. I'd respected that. I'd been patient with her trauma, understanding when she flinched at certain songs on the radio or got quiet during wedding scenes in movies. I thought I was being a good partner to someone who'd survived genuine tragedy. The man in the closet stood up slowly, unfolding to his full height of maybe 6'2". He was wearing jeans and a dark gray t-shirt that said, "Property of Georgetown Athletics," across the chest. His hair was longer than in the single photo Nina had shown me once, pulled back in a small bun, and he'd grown a beard, but I recognized him immediately from that photo. Trevor Vaughn, Nina's dead husband, who was definitely not dead. He held up both hands in a placating gesture, still not speaking, and I realized why. Nina was in the kitchen, 20 feet away, making coffee. I could hear the grinder whirring. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. My hands had gone completely numb. The shoe dropped again. Trevor's eyes flicked toward the bedroom door, then back to me, pleading. Every instinct screamed at me to yell, to grab him, to demand answers, but my vocal cords had frozen. I took 3 steps backward out of the closet, never breaking eye contact with him, and closed the door with a soft click. I walked into the kitchen like a robot with failing programming. Nina turned from the coffee maker with a smile that made my stomach drop through the floor. "Morning, babe. Want eggs, or did you already eat?" Her hair was pulled up in a messy bun, she was wearing my old college sweatshirt, and she looked so perfectly normal that I thought maybe I'd hallucinated the entire thing. Maybe I was having a breakdown. Maybe the stress from the merger at work had finally broken something in my brain, and I was seeing things. But then I noticed her phone face down on the counter, which she never did, and her car keys next to the door when she'd told me yesterday she was taking the metro to work today. Small things. Wrong things. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but she was already turning back to the stove, cracking eggs into a pan, humming something under her breath. "You okay? You look pale." I told her I was fine, that I just needed to use the bathroom, and walked back toward the bedroom with my pulse hammering in my ears. Trevor was gone. The closet was empty except for our clothes and shoes, arranged exactly as they'd been, except now I could see the impression in the carpet where he'd been crouching. The shoe that had fallen was back on the shelf. I checked the bedroom window, which faced the parking lot 3 stories down. Locked. I checked the bathroom, the spare room I used as an office, under the bed. Nothing. But the sliding door to our balcony, which I knew I'd locked last night, was open an inch. I stepped outside into the November cold and looked down. There was a drainage pipe running down the side of the building, and below, in the alley, a dark blue Jeep Cherokee was parked with its engine running. I watched as Trevor appeared from around the corner of the building, moving fast but not running, and climbed into the driver's seat. He looked up once, directly at me, and then drove away. I stood there in my boxers and t-shirt, freezing, trying to understand what I'd just witnessed. A dead man. In my closet. Who'd escaped down the side of my building like a practiced escape artist. I went back inside and locked the slider. Nina called from the kitchen that breakfast was ready. I told her I wasn't hungry, that I had an early meeting I'd forgotten about, and I needed to get ready. She asked if everything was okay 3 more times while I showered and dressed, and each time I said yes, I was fine, just stressed about work. I'd never been a good liar, but apparently shock makes you convincing, because she kissed me goodbye at the door and told me to have a good day, like nothing in the universe had shifted off its axis. I sat in my Subaru in the parking garage for 20 minutes with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. Then I drove to work, went through the motions of my job as a data analyst for a consulting firm, attended 3 meetings where I didn't retain a single word, and started making phone calls during my lunch break. I needed to know if I was insane. I needed proof that what I'd seen was real. The first call was to Georgetown University Hospital's Human Resources Department. I pretended to be calling from an insurance company verifying employment for a claim and asked if they had a Nina Westfield working in pediatrics. They confirmed she'd been employed there for 6 years, currently on the overnight shift rotation. Second call was to the Virginia Department of Motor Vehicles, where a board clerk told me that Trevor Michael Vaughn, born April 1989, had a valid driver's license with an address in Falls Church. Not deceased. License renewed 8 months ago. I felt the room tilt. Third call was to the Virginia Department of Health's Vital Records office, where I paid $42 with my credit card for an expedited death certificate search. The clerk said it would take 3 to 5 business days, but that preliminary searches showed no death certificate on file for anyone named Trevor Michael Vaughn, matching the birth date I provided in the last 10 years. She suggested I might have the wrong information. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat in my car in the parking lot and threw up into a shopping bag I found under the passenger seat. That evening, Nina came home at her normal time, 6:15. She kissed me, asked about my day, showed me a funny video on her phone of a toddler at the hospital dancing to a nurse's music. We made dinner together, pasta with marinara sauce, and watched an episode of a crime documentary series we'd been following. She fell asleep on the couch with her head on my shoulder around 9, and I sat there staring at the television without seeing it, feeling her breathe against my chest, wondering who the hell I'd been living with for over a year. At 10, I gently moved her and said I was going to bed early. She mumbled something about joining me soon, and I went to the bedroom and locked the door from the inside. Then I opened the closet and checked every corner, every shelf, looking for any sign of him. I found a protein bar wrapper wedged behind a shoebox. The expiration date was 3 months away, and it was a brand neither Nina nor I ate. Evidence. Small, but real. I put it in a Ziploc bag like I'd seen on those crime shows and hid it in my briefcase. I couldn't sleep. At 2 in the morning, I got up and went through Nina's things while she was asleep on the couch. Her purse was hanging by the door. Inside was her wallet, her hospital ID badge, chapstick, tampons, receipts from Target and Starbucks, and a small flip phone I'd never seen before. Not a smartphone, an old Nokia-style burner phone. It was off. I turned it on, and it required a password. I tried her birthday, my birthday, our anniversary. Nothing. I turned it off and put it back, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped her purse. Then I went through the storage unit key on her keychain, and I realized I'd never actually been to her storage unit. She'd told me it was in Alexandria, that it was just old furniture and boxes from her marriage, nothing I needed to see. I'd accepted that, trusted it. I took a photo of the key with my phone, noting the company logo and unit number. Then I went back to bed and lay there in the dark with my eyes open until the sun came up, listening to Nina shower and get ready for work, watching her move around our bedroom like everything was normal. She kissed me goodbye. I kissed her back. My lips felt numb. The storage facility was called Secure Space Alexandria, and I drove there straight from work the next day. I'd called ahead and told them I was Nina's fiancée, that I needed to grab some files from her unit for her while she was at work, and did I need any special documentation. The manager, a middle-aged guy named Phil, said as long as I had the key and could provide Nina's name and unit number, I was fine. Their security wasn't exactly Fort Knox. Unit 217 was on the 2nd floor, climate-controlled, about 10 by 10. I opened the padlock with my hands shaking, rolled up the metal door, and found myself staring at an almost empty space. There were 3 cardboard boxes, 1 folding chair, and a small filing cabinet. That was it. No furniture, no wedding photos, no preserved pieces of a past marriage. I opened the boxes. The first contained men's clothes, casual stuff, all in large sizes. The second had textbooks from Georgetown University, engineering courses, all with Trevor Vaughn's name written inside the cover. The third had documents. And this was where everything came apart. There were bank statements for a joint account under the names Nina and Trevor Vaughn, dated from last month. Transactions showing grocery purchases, gas, utilities, and rent payments to an apartment complex in Falls Church, the same address from Trevor's driver's license. There were insurance documents showing both of them listed on a car policy for 2 vehicles, including the blue Jeep Cherokee I'd seen. There was a lease agreement for a 2-bedroom apartment, signed 8 months ago by both of them, with both their signatures. And at the bottom of the box was a wedding photo, dated 6 years ago, showing Nina and Trevor on what looked like a beach in Mexico, both laughing, her in a white dress, him in khaki pants and a white shirt. They looked happy. They looked married. They looked alive. I took photos of everything with my phone, my hands shaking so badly that half the pictures came out blurred. Then I closed the boxes, locked the unit, and drove to the Falls Church address on the bank statements. It was a garden-style apartment complex called Riverside Terrace, and the blue Jeep Cherokee was parked in spot 43. I sat in my car across the street for 2 hours. At 6:45, Trevor came out of the apartment building, walked to the Jeep, and drove away. He was wearing business casual clothes, khakis, and a button-down shirt, like he was heading to work. Night shift, maybe. I waited 15 more minutes, then walked up to the apartment building and found Unit 207. I stood outside the door, listening. I could hear a television inside, the canned laughter of a sitcom. I knocked. The door opened, and Nina stood there in yoga pants and a tank top, her hair wet from a recent shower, looking at me with an expression that went from confused to terrified in the span of 2 seconds. "Evan," she said, and I watched her entire face change as she processed what this meant. I'd found her. I'd found them. I'd found the truth. Behind her, I could see inside the apartment. There was a couch, a coffee table with dinner plates on it, photos on the walls, photos of her and Trevor, recent photos, birthday parties, hiking trips, a vacation to the beach, a whole life, a real life. She started to close the door, and I put my foot in the gap. "We need to talk," I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, calm and cold and completely detached from the rage building in my chest. She let me in, because what choice did she have? I stood in her living room, this apartment she shared with her very much alive husband, and looked at the life she'd been living parallel to the one she'd built with me. There was a Cats-themed calendar on the wall with appointments written in, doctor visits, date nights. Someone's birthday circled on December 3rd. There were 2 toothbrushes in the bathroom holder visible through the open door. There were men's shoes by the entrance. Everything about this place screamed married couple, settled life, normal existence. Nina sat down on the couch and put her face in her hands. I stood near the door, ready to leave, ready to run, not sure if I was more angry or confused or just utterly destroyed. "How long?" I asked. She didn't answer. "How long have you been living here with him while telling me he was dead? How long have you been lying to me, Nina?" She looked up, and her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. 3 years, she said quietly. "Trevor and I have been married for 6 years. We've lived here for 8 months. Before that, we had an apartment in Arlington, about 2 miles from your place. The numbers didn't make sense until they did. You've been married to him the entire time we've been together." It wasn't a question. She nodded. "You're committing bigamy." Another nod. "Why?" I asked, and my voice broke on the word. She stood up, paced to the window, looked out at the parking lot. "Money," she said finally. "It started as money. Trevor's a software engineer at a defense contractor. Good salary, but we had debt. Medical debt from his mother's cancer treatment, student loans, credit cards. We were drowning. And I met you at that hospital fundraiser, and you were kind and stable, and you had a good job, and I thought—" She trailed off. I finished for her. "You thought you could date me, move in with me, cut your living expenses in half, and use me to pay off your debt while maintaining your real marriage." She flinched, but didn't deny it. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. It was supposed to be 6 months, maybe a year. just until we got ahead. But then you fell in love with me and I liked you. I liked having both lives. The stability with you, the history with Trevor. I couldn't choose. I thought about the rent I'd been paying alone, the groceries I'd bought, the utilities, the dinners out, the weekend trips, the birthday presents, the anniversary gifts. 14 months of my life and my money, funding her debt repayment while she played house with me 4 nights a week and spent the other 3 with her husband. Does he know about me? I asked. She nodded. He's known the whole time. He helped me set it up. The storage unit with the fake tragedy story, the burner phone for coordinating schedules, the overnight shift excuse so I could be with him. I felt like I'd been punched. Why was he in my closet? She looked at the floor. He was supposed to grab some documents from the storage unit, but he left them at your place by accident last month when he helped me move some boxes. He has a key to your building from when he did maintenance work there 2 years ago before we met. He was going to slip in while you were at work, but you came home early for lunch that day. He panicked and hid. The casualness of it, the practicality, made it so much worse. This wasn't passion or impulse. This was calculated fraud, executed over months, with contingency plans and backup keys and coordinated alibis. I told her I was going to the police. She said they wouldn't care, that bigamy was barely prosecuted anymore, that it was a Class 4 misdemeanor in Virginia with a maximum $250 fine. She said I couldn't prove financial fraud because I'd given her money willingly, that there was no contract between us, that a good lawyer would argue it was just a relationship that didn't work out. She said I should just walk away, that she'd move out of my place, that we could pretend this never happened. I looked at her, this woman I'd thought I knew, this woman I'd imagined a future with, and saw a complete stranger. You're wrong about one thing, I told her. You're wrong about me just walking away. Then I left, drove home to my empty condo that didn't feel like mine anymore, and started making phone calls. If the police wouldn't help, I'd find someone who would. I'd find every authority, every system, every resource available, and I'd make sure that their carefully constructed double life collapsed so completely that they'd spend years digging out of the rubble, not for revenge, for justice. Because what they'd done to me, they could do to someone else, and that was unacceptable. The first person I called was my attorney, James Keating, a partner at a mid-size firm in D.C. who'd handled my father's estate when he passed 3 years ago. James listened to the entire story without interrupting, then asked me to send him copies of everything I'd found and photographed. The bank statements, the lease, the storage unit contents, the photos of the apartment, everything. This isn't just bigamy, he said after reviewing the documents. This is fraud. You can prove she misrepresented her marital status to induce you into a financial relationship. That's actionable. We can file a civil suit for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, if we can establish that you had a financial partnership and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Virginia law is actually quite clear on this. You might not see criminal prosecution, but we can absolutely pursue financial damages. He quoted me an hourly rate that made me wince, but I didn't care. I told him to start the paperwork. He said he'd need a retainer of $5,000. I transferred it that evening. Then he told me something that changed everything. There's someone you need to talk to before we proceed. A private investigator I work with, former FBI. Her name's Lisa Brennan. She specializes in financial fraud and identity cases. If there's more to this than what you've found, she'll uncover it. Special Investigator Lisa Brennan, formerly of the FBI's white-collar crime division, met me at a coffee shop in Arlington 2 days later. She was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed, dressed in business casual, and carried a leather portfolio that she opened to reveal a notepad and a digital voice recorder. "James sent me your documents," she said after we'd ordered. "I've been looking into Nina and Trevor Vaughn for the last 48 hours. I need you to brace yourself because this is bigger than you think." She pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table. Inside were printouts of social media profiles, dating app screenshots, and financial records. Nina Westfield isn't her real name. Well, it is now, legally, but she was born Nina Patricia Hendricks. Changed her name 7 years ago after a fraud charge in Maryland that was dismissed on a technicality. Trevor Vaughn has a record too, nothing major, but a pattern of civil suits from creditors and one dismissed charge of insurance fraud from 2019. They're not just grifters, Evan. They're professionals. You're the fourth person we can confirm that Nina has done this to in the last 5 years. The coffee shop suddenly felt too loud, too bright, too real. Lisa flipped through the pages, showing me photos and documents. Victim number 1 was a guy named Christopher Lane, an accountant in Baltimore. She dated him for 10 months, moved in with him, told him she was a widow. He paid off $30,000 in her medical bills before he found out Trevor existed. Filed a police report, but never pursued legal action because she returned half the money and he didn't want the publicity. Victim 2 was Daniel Cross, a project manager in Richmond. Similar story, 8 months, $25,000 in various expenses and loans she never repaid. He also found out about Trevor and chose not to pursue it. Victim 3 was Oliver Brennan, no relation to me, an IT consultant in Fairfax. He actually did press charges, but the prosecutor declined to pursue because Nina argued it was just relationship expenses and there was no written contract. The charge was dropped. All 3 men were professionals, financially stable, single, and met Nina through either hospital-related events or charity fundraisers where she volunteered. She has a type. You fit it perfectly. I asked Lisa how they'd gotten away with it for so long. She closed the folder and looked at me with something like pity mixed with professional detachment. Because the system isn't designed to handle this kind of fraud. Bigamy laws are outdated and rarely enforced. Financial fraud in relationships is almost impossible to prosecute without clear proof of intent and written contracts. Most victims are too embarrassed to come forward, or they don't want to be tied up in court for years. Nina and Trevor know this. They're smart, they're careful, and they've refined their approach over time. You getting into that storage unit was a mistake on their part, leaving evidence in an unsecured location. Usually they're more careful. She paused. But here's the thing. If we can prove a pattern, if we can get the other victims to come forward, if we can show that this is an ongoing criminal enterprise rather than isolated incidents, we might have enough for the FBI to take an interest. Fraud across state lines, which they've committed by operating in Maryland and Virginia, falls under federal jurisdiction. That's wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, real charges, real consequences. I asked her what she needed from me. She pulled out a contract for her services, standard PI rates, $500 a day plus expenses, and told me she needed authorization to contact the previous victims and to conduct a full financial investigation into Nina and Trevor's activities. I signed it without reading the details. She promised me that within 2 weeks, she'd have a complete picture of their operation, and that we'd have enough evidence to either force a significant civil settlement or pursue federal charges. Then she told me something that made my blood run cold. Evan, I need you to act completely normal with Nina for the next week. Don't let her know that you know anything beyond what you confronted her about. Don't mention the other victims, don't mention me, don't mention the investigation. If she thinks you're building a case, she and Trevor will disappear. They've done it before. In 2021, right after the Oliver Brennan case started, they vanished for 6 months. No one could find them. They resurfaced in Virginia with new jobs and started over. If we're going to nail them, we need to keep them comfortable and unaware until everything is in place. Going back to my condo that night and pretending everything was normal was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Nina was there, cooking dinner, acting like our confrontation at the Falls Church apartment had never happened. She kissed me hello. She asked about my day. She served me chicken stir-fry and poured wine, and sat across from me at our small dining table, like we were a normal couple having a normal evening. I played along. I asked about her shift, told her about a presentation at work, laughed at something she said about a co-worker. Inside, I was screaming. Inside, I was cataloging every lie, every manipulation, every moment I'd believed her fake tears about her dead husband, and felt grateful that she'd chosen me despite her trauma. After dinner, we watched TV on the couch, her head on my shoulder, and I thought about the 3 other men who'd sat exactly where I was sitting, feeling exactly what I was feeling, believing they were special to her when they were just marks in a con game. When she went to bed, I stayed up late and started going through my financial records from the past 14 months, documenting every expense, every shared cost, every loan I'd given her that she'd promised to pay back. The numbers were devastating. I'd paid rent and utilities alone, approximately $3,200 a month for 14 months, $44,800. I'd covered groceries, gas, insurance for her car when she said she was between paychecks, approximately $600 a month, $8,400. I'd paid for vacations, including a week in Charleston where I'd covered the hotel, rental car, and most meals, $3,200. I'd bought her birthday presents, Christmas gifts, Valentine's Day expenses, anniversary dinner at an expensive restaurant where I'd paid $300 for the meal alone, approximately $4,000 in gifts and special occasions. She'd borrowed money directly twice, once for car repairs that cost $2,100, once for credit card debt she said was from her grief counseling and medical bills from when Trevor died, another $3,000. Total, approximately $63,500 over 14 months. Money that had funded her and Trevor's debt repayment, their vacation fund, their comfortable double life, while I'd lived paycheck to paycheck thinking I was building a future with someone I loved. I sent the spreadsheet to James Keating at 3 a.m. He emailed back an hour later, which meant he was also up in the middle of the night working on my case and told me this was exactly what we needed. Document everything, he wrote. Every conversation, every expense, every lie. We're building a timeline of fraud. Lisa's digging into their background, and I'm drafting the civil complaint. We're also going to file a report with the Arlington Police Department to create an official record. It won't result in charges, but it's documentation. And I'm reaching out to the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office to see if they have any interest in pursuing criminal charges if we can prove this is organized fraud. It's a long shot, but with multiple victims, we might have a case. Then he added something at the end that stayed with me. I'm sorry this happened to you, Evan, but you're doing the right thing by pursuing this. Not just for you, but for everyone else they might target in the future. That matters. I printed out his email and put it in a folder I was building, evidence and encouragement mixed together, fuel for the fight ahead. Lisa Brennan called me 6 days later and asked me to meet her at James Keating's office in downtown D.C. When I arrived, the conference room was set up like a war room, with documents spread across the table, a whiteboard covered in timeline notes, and a laptop connected to a projector showing financial spreadsheets. James was there, along with a woman I didn't recognize, professionally dressed, mid-30s, who introduced herself as Detective Angela Reeves from the Financial Crimes Unit of the Arlington County Police Department. We've been building this case for the last week, Lisa said without preamble, and we've got more than enough to move forward. Let me walk you through what we found. She pulled up a slide showing a timeline going back 8 years. Nina and Trevor Vaughn have been running variations of this con since 2017, possibly earlier. We've confirmed 6 victims now, including you. Total estimated fraud across all victims is approximately $370,000. They operate on a cycle. Nina targets single men in professional fields, builds a relationship for 6 to 12 months, extracts money for various manufactured emergencies or expenses, then ends the relationship when either the victim discovers the truth or the financial well runs dry. Trevor maintains their real life, works his job, and provides logistical support. Detective Reeves took over, pulling out her own folder of documents. I've been investigating fraud cases in the D.C. metro area for 9 years, and this is one of the more sophisticated operations I've seen. The reason they've evaded prosecution is because they never steal directly. They manipulate, they lie, but they rarely write contracts or make promises they can't explain away as relationship dynamics. However, the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office is interested in this case because of the multi-victim pattern. If we can get at least 2 of the previous victims to come forward and testify, we can argue this is a criminal enterprise. That changes everything. Suddenly, we're not talking about messy relationship finances. We're talking about conspiracy to commit fraud, which is a Class 5 felony in Virginia, carrying up to 10 years. She looked at me. The challenge is convincing the other victims to participate. Many of them want to move on, don't want to relive the experience, don't want their names attached to this. Lisa has been reaching out, but we need your help. If you're willing to go public with your story, if you're willing to be the first domino, others might follow. I asked what going public meant. James explained, it means filing a formal police report, which becomes part of the public record. It means potentially speaking to media, if that becomes relevant to building public pressure on the prosecutor's office to pursue charges. It means being prepared for Nina and Trevor's attorney to come after you, claiming defamation, harassment, anything to discredit you. It means your name will be attached to this case, and anyone who Googles you will find it. It's not a small ask. He was giving me an out, a chance to walk away and just pursue the civil suit quietly. I thought about the $63,000 I'd lost. I thought about Christopher, Daniel, Oliver, and the 2 other victims Lisa had found whose names I didn't even know yet. I thought about whoever would come next if we didn't stop this. I'll do it, I said. Whatever it takes. I'll go public. I'll testify. I'll be the first domino. Detective Reeves smiled, a thin, professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and slid a statement form across the table. Then let's make this official, she said. Tell me everything from the beginning. The statement took 3 hours. Detective Reeves recorded it, typed it, asked clarifying questions, and had me initial every page. She asked about specific dates, specific conversations, specific amounts of money, and what they were allegedly for. She asked about the storage unit, the apartment in Falls Church, the confrontation, everything. When we finished, she told me this would be forwarded to the Commonwealth's Attorney's Fraud Division, and that she'd be recommending they open a criminal investigation. She also told me that I needed to prepare for Nina and Trevor to figure out what was happening. The moment we start interviewing the other victims, word will get back to them. They'll lawyer up, they might run, or they might come after you legally to try to scare you off. You need to be ready for that. Document every interaction with them from this point forward. If they contact you, record it if Virginia's one-party consent law allows it, which it does. If they threaten you, call me immediately. Don't engage beyond what's necessary to protect yourself. She gave me her card with her direct number and told me to check in with her every few days, even if I had nothing to report, just to maintain the investigative timeline. I went home that evening expecting a confrontation, but Nina wasn't there. Her clothes were still in the closet, her toiletries in the bathroom, but she wasn't home. Her car was gone from the parking lot. I checked the Find My Friends app we'd been sharing, and she'd turned off her location. I called her phone, and it went straight to voicemail. I sent a text asking if she was okay, where she was, trying to sound concerned rather than suspicious. She didn't respond. At midnight, I called Lisa Brennan and told her Nina had disappeared. Don't panic, Lisa said. She probably figured out you're building a case. Check the apartment in Falls Church tomorrow and see if they're still there. If they've run, we'll put out alerts through James's network and notify Detective Reeves. If they're just laying low and lawyering up, that's actually better for us because it shows consciousness of guilt. Either way, keep documenting. Take photos of her stuff still being at your place. Save all your unanswered calls and texts. Everything is evidence now. She paused. Evan, I know this is hard, but you're doing great. Most people would have walked away by now. The fact that you're pushing through this means something. Nina didn't come back that night, or the next day, or the next week. I filed a formal eviction notice through my landlord after 5 days of absence, citing abandonment and fraud, with James's help drafting the language. On day 7, Trevor showed up at my door. He knocked softly, didn't ring the bell, and when I opened it with my phone already recording in my pocket per Detective Reeves's instructions, he looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, unshaven, wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt like he'd slept in his car. We need to talk, he said. I told him through the cracked door that we had nothing to discuss, that he needed to leave, and that if he didn't, I'd call the police. Just 5 minutes, he said. Please. Nina's falling apart. She's terrified. She knows you're building some kind of case against us, and she thinks she's going to jail. I need you to tell me what you want. Money? We can pay you back. An apology? We're sorry. We screwed up. Just tell me what it takes to make this go away. I looked at him, this man who'd helped orchestrate over a year of lies, and felt nothing but cold anger. What I want, I said slowly, is for every person you've defrauded to get justice. What I want is for you and Nina to face actual consequences for what you've done. That's not negotiable. Trevor's face hardened. You're making a mistake, he said. We have a good lawyer. You'll never prove fraud. All you'll do is waste money and look like a bitter ex trying to weaponize the legal system. Then he left. I sent the recording to Detective Reeves and James within minutes. James called back immediately. That's consciousness of guilt. He just admitted they defrauded you, offered restitution, and then threatened you with legal action. That recording is golden. I'm forwarding it to the Commonwealth's attorney right now with a note that this makes the case exponentially stronger. Detective Reeves was equally enthusiastic. This is exactly what we needed. Most fraud cases fall apart because defendants can claim misunderstanding or relationship dynamics. Trevor just confirmed they knowingly defrauded you and are trying to avoid consequences. I'm escalating this. I think we have enough for the prosecutor to move forward. 2 days later, I got a call from the Commonwealth's attorney's office. A prosecutor named David Thornton wanted to meet with me, Lisa, and Detective Reeves to discuss filing formal charges. We're looking at conspiracy to commit fraud, obtaining money by false pretenses, and potentially identity fraud, if we can prove Nina misrepresented herself materially to induce financial reliance. This could go to a grand jury within a month if the evidence holds, he told us in his office overlooking Arlington County Courthouse. But I need the other victims. I need at least 2 more to testify. Can you make that happen? Lisa had been working on that for 2 weeks. She'd contacted all 5 of the other confirmed victims, and 3 had agreed to speak with her. 2 were willing to consider testifying if it went to trial. Christopher Lane, the Baltimore accountant who'd been the first victim we knew of, told Lisa over the phone, which she'd recorded with his permission, that he'd been waiting for someone to do something about Nina and Trevor for years. I let it go because I was embarrassed and didn't want to deal with the legal system, he said. But if you're actually pursuing this, if there's a real chance they'll face consequences, I'll testify. I'll do whatever it takes. What they did to me destroyed my ability to trust people. I haven't dated anyone seriously in 4 years because of them. Daniel Cross, the Richmond project manager, said something similar. I paid $25,000 to help someone I thought I loved, and it turned out I was just an ATM machine to them. If my testimony helps put them away, I'm in. The third victim who was willing to talk, a woman named Rachel Torres who dated Trevor in 2018, before he and Nina had perfected their con, told Lisa that she'd filed a report in Maryland, but nothing had come of it. He told me he was separated from his wife, that the divorce was almost final, Rachel said. He borrowed $15,000 from me for legal fees that didn't exist. When I found out they were still together, still married, I felt like an idiot. But yes, I'll testify. Someone needs to stop them. With 3 corroborating victims willing to testify, and my detailed financial documentation, the Commonwealth's attorney moved forward. A grand jury was convened in mid-December, about 6 weeks after I'd found Trevor in my closet, and Detective Reeves presented the evidence. James attended as my attorney, and Lisa provided her investigative findings. The grand jury deliberated for 2 days and returned indictments on 4 counts. 2 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud against Nina and Trevor jointly, 1 count of obtaining money by false pretenses against Nina, and 1 count of financial exploitation through misrepresentation against both of them. Each count carried different penalties, but the conspiracy charges were the most serious, Class 5 felonies with up to 10 years in prison. Arrest warrants were issued. Detective Reeves called me from the courthouse steps. They're going to be arrested within 24 hours, she said. We've located them at the Falls Church apartment. Arlington PD will execute the warrants tomorrow morning. Do you want to be notified when it happens? I told her yes. I wanted to know the moment their carefully constructed world came apart. The arrests happened at 6:15 in the morning on a Thursday. Detective Reeves called me at 6:45 from the Arlington County Detention Center. They're both in custody. Nina tried to run when we knocked on the door, made it about 10 feet down the hallway before officers stopped her. Trevor cooperated fully, seemed resigned to it. They've been read their rights, booked, and they're waiting for arraignment this afternoon. Their attorney is already here, some hotshot criminal defense lawyer from D.C. named Philip Crane, who apparently specializes in white-collar crime. He's arguing for immediate release on recognizance, claiming they're not flight risks and have deep ties to the community. She laughed bitterly. Deep ties to the community. The people who've run this con across 2 states and disappeared for 6 months when things got hot? The arraignment judge is going to love that argument. I asked if I needed to be there. She said no, not for the arraignment, but that the Commonwealth's attorney would be requesting that I attend a bail hearing if one was scheduled. Your presence as the primary victim sends a message. Plus, you might get to see them in orange jumpsuits, if that provides any closure, she added. It did, a little. The arraignment was that afternoon. James attended and called me immediately after. Bail was set at $50,000 each, which their lawyer posted within an hour. They're out but under travel restrictions, have to surrender their passports, and are required to check in with a monitoring service weekly. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for January 9th, about 3 weeks from now. That's where we'll present the evidence, and the judge will determine if there's enough to go to trial. The prosecutor is confident, but we need to be prepared for their defense team to come out swinging. They're going to argue this was consensual relationship spending, that there was no fraud, that you and the other victims gave money willingly without contracts or expectations of repayment. We need to show intent to deceive, materiality of the misrepresentations, and reasonable reliance on false information. The recording of Trevor trying to buy you off helps enormously. So does the pattern with multiple victims. But it's not a slam dunk. He told me to prepare for a fight, that criminal trials are unpredictable, and that even with strong evidence, juries can be sympathetic to defendants who present well. They're going to make Nina cry on the stand, he warned. They're going to paint her as a confused woman in a complicated relationship who made bad choices but didn't commit crimes. Don't let it shake you. Remember what they did. Remember the other victims. Remember why we're doing this. The preliminary hearing was everything James warned me about and worse. Nina and Trevor showed up in business attire, looking like respectable professionals rather than accused fraudsters. Their attorney, Philip Crane, was exactly the kind of smooth-talking defense lawyer you'd expect. Mid-50s, expensive suit, confident demeanor that bordered on arrogant. He argued that the Commonwealth's case was built on regrets masquerading as fraud, that relationship finances are messy and emotional, and that criminalizing failed romances sets a dangerous precedent. My clients are guilty of poor judgment in their personal lives, he told the judge. They're guilty of hurting people emotionally, but they're not criminals. Every expense Mr. Carver documented was voluntary. There were no written agreements, no explicit promises of repayment, no fraud, just complicated people in complicated situations making complicated choices. I sat in the gallery with Christopher Lane and Daniel Cross, the two other victims who'd agreed to attend, and watched the judge's face as Crane spoke. She looked skeptical, but not dismissive. This could go either way. The prosecutor, David Thornton, countered with the pattern evidence. He walked the judge through all 6 confirmed victims, the timeline spanning 8 years. The consistent methodology of Nina fabricating a dead spouse story to elicit sympathy and financial support while maintaining her actual marriage to Trevor. He presented the recording of Trevor offering restitution and threatening legal action, arguing it showed consciousness of guilt. He presented financial records showing Nina and Trevor had paid off over $60,000 in debt during the same period they'd defrauded me and others, suggesting the money went directly to their benefit. This isn't messy relationship finances, Your Honor, Thornton said. This is a calculated, multi-year criminal enterprise. The defendants identified vulnerable targets, employed the same false backstory repeatedly, extracted money under false pretenses, and moved on to new victims when discovered. That's not poor judgment. That's fraud. The judge asked several pointed questions about intent and materiality, clearly struggling with where relationship dynamics ended and criminal conduct began. Crane pounced on every ambiguity, every moment of uncertainty, arguing that the Commonwealth couldn't prove beyond reasonable doubt that Nina and Trevor had intended criminal fraud rather than just being ethically questionable people. After 4 hours of arguments and testimony from Detective Reeves about the investigation, the judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence to bind the case over for trial. I find that the Commonwealth has presented enough evidence for a reasonable jury to conclude that the defendants engaged in a pattern of fraudulent conduct. Whether that conduct rises to the level of criminal fraud beyond reasonable doubt will be for a jury to decide. Trial is set for March 15th. Bail conditions remained in place. Crane immediately filed a motion to dismiss on various grounds, which the judge denied. Outside the courthouse, Christopher, Daniel, and I stood in the cold January wind with James and Lisa, feeling like we'd won a battle, but the war was far from over. They're going to trial, Lisa said. That's huge. Most fraud cases get dismissed at the preliminary hearing level. The fact that the judge found sufficient evidence means we have a real shot. James was more cautious. It also means 3 more months of this, depositions, possibly media attention if Crane decides to go that route, and the very real possibility of acquittal or hung jury. Juries don't like convicting people for relationship choices. We need to be prepared for any outcome. The trial started on March 15th in Arlington County Circuit Court. The Commonwealth's attorney had assembled a strong case, with financial experts testifying about the pattern of debt repayment coinciding with the timeline of Nina's relationships with victims, digital forensics specialists showing the burner phone records and coordinated communications between Nina and Trevor during the con, and testimony from 5 victims, including me. The defense strategy, as James had predicted, centered on painting Nina as a troubled woman who'd made mistakes but hadn't committed crimes. Crane put Nina on the stand for 2 days. She cried multiple times. She apologized to the victims, including looking directly at me in the gallery and saying through tears, "I never meant to hurt anyone. I was drowning in debt and fear and I made terrible choices. But I never set out to defraud anyone. I genuinely cared about Evan. I genuinely cared about all of them." It was a masterful performance, and I could see several jurors softening as she spoke. Crane also emphasized that Trevor had maintained steady employment throughout, that they'd eventually paid off their debts through legitimate means, and that while their behavior was morally questionable, it didn't meet the legal standard for criminal fraud. The jury deliberated for 5 days. 5 agonizing days where I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly, kept refreshing my phone, waiting for updates from James or Detective Reeves. On day 5, the jury sent a note to the judge that they'd reached a verdict. James called me and told me to get to the courthouse immediately. I arrived to find the courtroom packed with media, other fraud victims who'd been following the case, and supporters of both sides. Nina and Trevor sat at the defense table looking exhausted and terrified. The jury foreman stood when the judge asked if they'd reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor." The clerk read the charges one by one. "On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud against Nina Patricia Vaughn, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud against Trevor Michael Vaughn, how do you find?" "Guilty." I felt my knees weaken. Christopher grabbed my arm to steady me. The clerk continued through all 4 counts. Guilty on all counts for both defendants. The courtroom erupted in reactions, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. Nina collapsed forward onto the table, sobbing. Trevor sat perfectly still, staring at nothing. Crane requested immediate motions for acquittal notwithstanding verdict, which the judge denied. Sentencing was set for 6 weeks later. At the sentencing hearing in early May, the judge heard victim impact statements from all 5 victims who testified at trial. I spoke for 10 minutes about the financial devastation, the emotional trauma, the inability to trust people, the therapy I'd needed, the relationships with friends and family that had been strained because I'd isolated myself in shame and embarrassment. Christopher spoke about the 4 years he'd spent unable to date because of trust issues. Daniel talked about the debt he'd gone into trying to recover financially. Rachel Torres, Trevor's victim from the Maryland case, spoke about the betrayal of thinking someone loved her when she was just a mark. The cumulative weight of the testimonies seemed to affect the judge deeply. When it was time for sentencing, she addressed Nina and Trevor directly. "You didn't just steal money from these people. You stole their ability to trust, their sense of reality, their emotional security. You constructed elaborate lies that caused profound psychological harm. The law provides for restitution and imprisonment in cases like this, and I intend to use both." She sentenced Nina to 6 years in state prison, with all but 4 years suspended, conditioned on full restitution to all victims, and 5 years of supervised probation after release. Trevor received 5 years with all but 3 suspended under the same conditions. They were also ordered to pay a total of $387,000 in restitution to the 6 confirmed victims, plus court costs and investigative fees. Nina and Trevor were taken into custody immediately after sentencing. No more bail, no more delays. I watched from the gallery as they were led out in handcuffs through a side door, Nina still crying, Trevor walking with his head down. James shook my hand. Lisa hugged me, which surprised me because she hadn't seemed like a hugger throughout this entire process. Detective Reeves told me this was one of the most satisfying outcomes she'd seen in her 9 years working fraud cases. They'll serve real time, they'll pay real restitution, and they'll be convicted felons for the rest of their lives. Every future job application, every rental agreement, every relationship they try to build will have this hanging over them. That's justice. The Commonwealth's attorney, David Thornton, held a brief press conference on the courthouse steps where he emphasized that fraud victims should always come forward, that patterns of abuse deserve prosecution, and that the criminal justice system does work when victims have courage. Several news outlets covered the case locally. My name was in the articles. I didn't care anymore. The shame I'd felt for being deceived had transformed into something else. Pride, maybe. Or just resolution. 3 months after the sentencing, I received a check from the Virginia Victim Compensation Fund for $47,000, representing most of what I'd lost to Nina and Trevor. The restitution order meant the state would pursue collection of the full amount from them over time, garnishing prison wages and any future earnings. But the compensation fund provided immediate relief to victims while that process played out. I deposited the check, paid off the credit card debt I'd accumulated during the case, and put the rest in savings. I also started therapy with a psychologist who specialized in fraud victims, working through the trust issues and shame and anger that lingered even after the legal victory. It wasn't quick, it wasn't easy. But slowly, over months, I started to feel like myself again. I started dating again. I told potential partners about what happened early on, not as a sob story, but as context for why I asked a lot of questions and moved slowly. Most people understood, some didn't, and that was fine. I'd learned to recognize red flags. I'd learned to trust my instincts. I'd learned that justice, real justice, was possible even when the system seemed stacked against victims. A year after finding Trevor in my closet, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Arlington working on my laptop when I got an email from Christopher Lane. He and Daniel Cross and Rachel Torres had formed a small advocacy group for romance fraud victims, and they were launching a website and support network. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to share my story, anonymously or publicly, to help other victims understand they weren't alone and that pursuing justice was possible. I agreed immediately. The website went live a month later, and within weeks they'd heard from dozens of people who'd experienced similar scams, some who'd never reported because they didn't think anyone would care, some who were in the middle of cases and needed support and information. What Nina and Trevor had done to us became the catalyst for something bigger, a community of survivors helping each other heal and fight back. It didn't erase what happened. It didn't make the betrayal hurt less, but it gave meaning to the pain. It transformed victimhood into purpose. The last time I thought about Nina and Trevor was this morning, when I woke up in my condo that finally felt like mine again, made coffee in the kitchen where I'd once eaten dinner with a woman who was lying to me about her entire life, and realized I'd gone 3 days without thinking about them at all. That's the real victory, I think. Not the guilty verdict, or the prison sentences, or the restitution checks. The real victory is reclaiming your life from the people who tried to steal it. It's trusting again, loving again, believing that most people are good even after meeting people who aren't. It's knowing that you survived something that could have broken you, and instead, you built something stronger from the pieces. Trevor was right about one thing during that confrontation at my door. I did make a mistake. My mistake was ever trusting them. But the thing about mistakes is you get to learn from them, grow beyond them, and make sure they never define you. They're in prison. I'm free. That's all the ending I needed. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.